I wonder if I actually have to freak out for the mid-year book freak out tag.
Gary! You are gonna finish your dessert and you are gonna like it!
Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for this video, I'm going to be doing the mid-year freak-out book tag, or the mid-year book freak-out tag. I don't know what the hell it is, but you know what I'm getting at here. Basically, this tag is just going to be a good summation of my reading year so far for 2021. Some of my favorite stuff, some of my least favorite stuff, and everything in between. Actually, not really. It's just favorite and least favorite stuff, for the most part. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So question one is favorite book you've read so far this year. And I was going to originally try to pick one, but I figured I'd go with two just because both of these books are going to be in my new top 10 books of all time list. I'm going to have to update it because these books were just incredible. And the first one I'll pick here is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And then I also have Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. Both all-time favorite books for me, and I'm so glad I picked them up this year. And I like them for like vastly different reasons. This was just a feel-good book, even though there's some depressing stuff in here. This book was just written for me. Like, it's about classic rock and this fictional band, Daisy Jones and the Six, and just them dealing with band drama and just writing good songs and the audiobook was incredible. It's a book that I can definitely see myself rereading every year, again and again, for the rest of my life. Imaginary Friend, I loved just because a lot of the times when you're reading a horror book or even when you're watching a horror movie, you don't really care for the characters. So when all this bad and creepy stuff is happening, you're like, oh, that's, it's kind of scary, but like, I don't really give a crap about these people. But Stephen Chbosky here manages to create a cast of characters that you actually come to love, especially Kate and Christopher, the mom and son duo in here. Every time bad stuff happens to them, you're just like, no! And it's just a very anxiety-inducing book, which is a huge reason why I read this 700-page book with very tiny print in 3 days. Because I had to know, like, okay, come on, bad stuff's happening. Good stuff's got to happen eventually. But yeah, not only is this one of the best horror books I've ever read, just flat out one of the best books I've ever read. And I'm so glad I decided to pick it up. Question two is best sequel you've read so far this year. And this, but it's required a little bit of thought, but ultimately I went with Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, book 4 in the Stormlight Archive. And this just makes a lot of sense because Stormlight Archive is my second favorite fantasy series of all time. And I will say Rhythm of War, it's not quite my favorite book in the series. That distinction still goes to Way of Kings, but I'd probably put this as number 2. And then books 2 and 3 would be 3 and 4. Book math. But yeah, I was super excited for this book and I was not let down at all. It was super gripping and just a great entry into one of my favorite fantasy series. A great sequel. Question 3, a new release that you want to get to but you haven't quite gotten to yet, is actually the sequel to a very gripping sci-fi debut, A Memory Called Empire. And the sequel, which I really want to get to, is A Desolation Called Peace. I really loved A Memory Called Empire. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I love the characters. I love the premise. I love the world building. And I'm going to be reading this book for the Olympics Readathon this month. So got it in just under the wire because I really want to read this book. Question 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And clearly, if you've watched any of my videos, you know I'm a huge Stephen King fan. And so his new book, Billy Summers, I think that comes out in August. Of course, I will be picking that up immediately. And, you know, hopefully it's good. With King, you know, it could go either way, but I have high hopes. Question 5 is biggest disappointment, and you know, I don't have the book because I unhauled it because it was such a big disappointment. And that would be Fate of the Fallen by Kel Cade. Not a great book. I read this book for the Shelf Space Book Club, I think back in March, and I was severely underwhelmed. And the premise was very cool because even though I'm a huge fantasy reader, I'm not a huge fan of the chosen one trope, like just having a person whose like destiny is to like go fulfill this quest and then ultimately become the hero. I'm not a huge fan of that. And it was supposed to turn that on its head and kind of put its own twist on it, because the chosen one very quickly dies, and the friend of the chosen one, he's kind of like trying to pick up the pieces, and that premise sounded really cool, but the what's the word I'm looking for? But the execution of this premise was just bad in my mind, and it was just really silly. And even though it was adult fantasy, it had a very juvenile tone to it, which I thought was really weird with what was going on. And ultimately, I got excited for the book, and it let me down. And question 6, biggest surprise of the year so far, that would definitely have to go with Haruki Murakami, After the Quake. Now, this might sound weird because Haruki Murakami is a top 10 author for me, but that's mostly because of his novels. Most of the novels I've read by him have been stellar, but his short stories can be kind of hit or miss. Some were good, like Men Without Women was good, but then I've tried reading several of his other ones, and they've all just fell flat for me. So when I picked this book up, I was kind of hesitant because it's a short story collection, but ultimately I was very surprised by how much I liked it. In fact, I gave it 4.5 stars. There's only 6 stories in here, and 5 of them were really good. One of them was so-so, but pretty much it was a fantastic short story collection, and I was very surprised. And question number 7, favorite new author for me, and that would hands down have to go with Taylor Jenkins Reid, because I've read 3 of her books this year, including Daisy Jones and the Six, which is a top 10 book for me, 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and her brand new book, Malibu Rising, which I do have a review for, if you're interested. I read all 3 of these books this year. They're all 5-star books, and she's quickly becoming one of my favorite authors, even though I've only read 3 of her books. Pretty sure she's locked into my top 10 authors at this point. This next question is a little weird for me. Newest fictional crush. I don't really get crushes on fictional characters, but if I had to go with someone, I would pick Jane from The Wife Upstairs. She's the main protagonist of the story, and this book overall was just a pleasant surprise for me. It's a thriller that came out earlier this month, and I absolutely loved it. particularly for the main protagonist, because a lot of the times in thrillers, you can kind of get like a bland or cookie cutter protagonist, and they're just not that interesting. But she was actually surprisingly very interesting, and I loved her kind of attitude she had, where she's kind of out against the world, she's had a rough life, and she kind of digs into this society where she can kind of put her foot down and just make a new life for herself. And I just kind of love her personality. So if I had to pick one, which I don't really want to, but if I had to, she'd be my fictional crush. And question 9, newest favorite character. I'm going to kind of cheat and pick 2. They're both in the same book, and you can't kind of have one without the other. So I'm going to go with imaginary friend, Kate and Christopher, the mom and son duo. Never have I read a horror book where I quite cared about the characters like this book, because just their relationship was just very sweet, and the mom is just so protective of the son. It was very admiring to read a book like that. And that's why the book was so, like I said, anxiety inducing, because, you know, you grow to love the characters and then bad stuff starts happening and you're like, no. But yeah, I definitely go with Kate and Christopher. Probably one of my favorite mom-son relationships I've ever read. And question 10, book that made you cry. I'm honestly not that big of a crier, especially when it comes to books. I've never read a book that made me cry. If I'm going to cry, it'll probably be through music. But there's definitely books that I read that can get an emotional reaction from me, usually more through dread than like sadness or like me crying. And a book that I recently just read that was just a gut punch to my soul was The Push. And this book, like I said, it was just a severe gut punch. There's certain scenes and certain lines in this book that just are like, oh man, I feel you, and I feel the character's pain, and this book is definitely not for the faint of heart. So even though this book didn't make me cry, it was definitely a gut punch to my soul. And on the complete opposite end, we have question 11, a book that you read that made you happy. And this book, I couldn't read this book without having a smile on my face the entire time, and that would be Daisy Jones and the Six. Just like I said, it's a very feel-good book, and this book was written for me, I think, someone like me, and just, I literally couldn't read this book without smiling, or listening to the audiobook. It's so good. And for number 12, most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received, I'm going to go with the book that I'm currently reading, and I think the cover is just stunning, and that would be The Bone Shard Daughter. I really like the red background and the white and black text, and then kind of the gray stuff that's happening here. I think it's really beautiful. It's just a really cool design and a very beautiful cover. And number 13, what books do you need to finish by the end of the year? And for the 3 picks that I have here, they're all books a part of a fantasy series. And for the first one, I recently just read or reread 12 Kings and Cherokee and With Blood Upon the Sand. Now I'm pretty interested in actually finishing the series, and I'm currently starting Vale of Spears, which is book 3, and then I'm going to quickly acquire books 4, 5, and then I still need to look and see if book 6 is out yet, but I'm going to try to finish that series this year because my reread of the first 2 books was incredible. The next series is The Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. I read the first 4 books, and now I need to read book 5, Age of Death, and book 6, Age of Empire. And they're both very short, so I know I'll be able to get to them. And the last series is a series that I should have finished a long time ago, because the first book, City of Stairs, I read, I think, a couple years ago. I absolutely loved it. One of my all-time favorite fantasy books. And I've never gotten around to the sequels, City of Blades and City of Miracles. So probably either in July or August, I'm not quite sure yet, I'm going to reread City of Stairs and then just immediately jump into City of Blades and City of Miracles. And I'm definitely feeling that this is going to be one of my all-time favorite trilogies, up there with the Themis Files and the Poppy War trilogy. And I think the last question is just to like tag someone. But honestly, as far as I can tell, booktubers just do this tag anyway. So I don't really feel the need to tag anybody. But if you're watching and you want to do this, go out and do it. I will, however, give a quick shout out to Team Apollo for the Olympics readathon. We're currently in 3rd place. We're creeping up on Team Zeus. I feel like we're going to win. I've got high hopes for us. But even if we don't win, we all have to collectively take down Alan and Team Zeus. They will not win at all costs. But anyway, what did you guys think of my mid-year book freakout tag video? Have you read any of the books that I mentioned here? And if you have, did you love them? Did you hate them? You guys know the drill. Leave it down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.